Hello and welcome to Bags of Action. My name's Steve and this is a 5-minute review of We Own the Night from 2007. The film is written and directed by James Gray, who is a name you probably don't know because he hasn't done a lot of directing and he's done a fair bit of writing. But the films that he has done over the years, going back to the 90s, have been ones that he's picked perhaps very carefully and he's had some ownership of. So The Yards was a film that he previously worked on with Joaquin Phoenix and Mark Wahlberg back in the year 2000, which he also wrote and directed. And then 7 years later he worked on We Own the Night, which is another crime film featuring these two actors in the lead roles. So this is a really interesting film, and going in at the beginning I thought I had a fairly good idea of what it was about, having watched the trailer. However, for once I was glad to see that the trailer was misleading and it wasn't the kind of film that I was thinking. At the start of the film we meet Joaquin Phoenix's character Bobby Green, and he manages this club. It's set in New York in the 1980s, and he runs the club for this Russian gangster, although he doesn't really know what his business is about. On the other side of town, on the same night that he's running the club and showing everyone a good time, his brother, who's a police officer, is being awarded a commendation for a promotion, and their father is played by Duvall, and his brother, I should say, is Mark Wahlberg. So you've got this cop and you've got this guy who's on the fringes of the criminal underworld. And the two clash, as it would inevitably happen within this small family. You would expect it to. But here's where the film gets really interesting and not what I was expecting. At the start, when we meet Bobby, he seemed like a really sleazy guy. He's, making out with this woman on the sofa and you think it's just someone he's picked up, some girl from the club. It turns out to be not the case at all. It's his girlfriend, played by the amazing Eva Mendes. They then go across town to his brother's ceremony, and obviously he gets into an argument with his father and his brother because they don't approve of his way of life. He thinks they're straight, they don't know how to live. He just wants to be left alone to get on with his own life. He's even distanced himself from his brother and his father by using his mother's maiden name, so no one knows him within the club world, who his family are and what they do, because his dad is sometimes referred to as the super cop in the city, or the J. Edgar Hoover, because he's all of the work he's done over the years. So at the beginning you've got these two very clear archetypes, the brother who's made the mistakes, who's on the edge of the law, who's going to get into trouble and fall down the rabbit hole, and you've got the straight super cop who's really good, who's getting promoted. Now he's leading this task force and he warns Bobby and says, we're going to be raiding, going after drugs, we end up coming to your club, so you need to be aware of this. They raid the club, his brother gets arrested, and the two of them have a fight about it and sparks go everywhere. It's difficult to talk about this film without spoiling it, but I'll certainly try. So the two archetypes that the film sets up from the very first scene are not what they appear to be at all. There's something that happens about half an hour into the film. This is a 2-hour film, and at that point I wasn't really sure what was going to go on. Without spoiling it too much, all I can say is that Bobby comes into conflict with the people that he's been working with, and it turns out that he's more loyal to his family because of something that happens there than to the people he's surrounded himself with, because they appear to be his friends but they're not. And this is where the film gets really, really interesting, because it deviates from what it's set up at the beginning that you think is very, very obvious, and the film becomes quite unpredictable after that. There are a couple of really interesting U-turns with the characters that you never saw coming, and in some of the most tense moments and awkward moments you expect them to do one thing because of what they've set up, and they veer and go completely in the other direction. And you get this strange separation where the two characters move much closer to each other than you would have expected the two brothers. They're brought together by something, and yet they're both changed in it in ways that I never expected. And this film really is a fantastic character study. It's set in the 1980s, so they've taken away some of the elements of technology and other things that might have made the plot a little bit easier and things to resolve, which also means they have to rely more on old school investigation techniques, and the cops have to use manpower to solve things. They can't sort of search for things and just find it on the internet or anything like that. They have to get boots on the ground and go and do it themselves. And that means placing somebody in danger, and in this case, it's one or both of the brothers. Even though this film is 2 hours long, I got to about an hour in and I was suddenly thinking, that there must have been some kind of mistake and the rest is just really long credits, because normally what happens at the middle point of the film would be the entire film for something else. And there again, the film changes and goes in another direction. So I just did not expect what was going on. I was absolutely gripped the entire time. There's no point I was looking at my watch. The only time I did was I got to this point halfway through and I thought, what's happening? What's going on? I don't really understand it. And that was great because I couldn't predict what was going to happen next. Let's talk about the cast. They're absolutely fantastic in all of this. Joaquin Phoenix is really, really interesting as a character in here. He has a very laid-back, chilled style of acting in this role. I've seen him more animated in other roles, and this one, he's very laid back. It's very fitting with the character. And Mark Wahlberg gave us a fantastic performance. He comes off as this really cocky, really outgoing, really brilliant super cop. And as the film goes on, you realise there is a lot more to him, and that he's actually quite troubled and there are things going on beneath the surface, and that it was just this brave facade that he was putting on. You've also got Robert Duvall, who gives a solid performance as the proud father of both of these brothers, and as the story develops, he also has some interesting changes too. The rest of the cast, including the wonderful Eva Mendes, who's playing Bobby Green's girlfriend, she, at the start, just appears to be this floozy, but they flip that within the first couple of minutes and you realise that she's someone who deeply cares about Bobby. She carries his secrets, she doesn't tell anybody, but she knows the truth about his family. And that becomes an interesting plot point later on, because he's got his loyalty to her as someone he wants to protect, and also his family, who he wants to protect as well. The action scenes in this film are interesting because they put you right in the centre of it. And when someone gets shot, it's not at a distance. You feel the blood spatter, you see it land on characters' faces, and you're really there in the thick of it. So it's got this really visceral, really unpleasant feeling to it. The other thing worth mentioning is the score. There's a car chase about an hour in, I think, or shortly after, and the music becomes this really powerful, almost monotonous sound. These cars are driving through the rain and the windscreen wipers are going, and you can barely see, and the music changes to this awful kind of noise that mimics the windscreen wipers, and it's really, really powerful and really adds to the tension of the scene. From looking at the box office of this film, it's really quite interesting because the budget was about $20 million and worldwide it made $55 million, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's, twice as much. So it made a profit. And it has this amazing cast and a fantastic story, and yet I rarely hear people talking about it in terms of crime films. Maybe because it came out during a very busy period, lots of other films and lots of tentpole films, I don't know. Having a modern film come out set in the 1980s was probably a bit of a risk too, although with such big names behind it, that would obviously motivate some people to go and see the film regardless, but it probably didn't make the numbers nearly that the distributors wanted it to, even though from the sounds of it, it has made a profit. This film has really motivated me to go out and seek more work by James Gray because he's done very, very diverse films, as well as doing a couple of crime dramas. He's done things like The Lost City of Zed, and most recently he directed the science fiction film Ad Astra starring Brad Pitt. So he doesn't sort of stick to one genre, and he's worked with some very big names and some very big people, but he either isn't offered a lot of stuff or he's just picking and choosing what he works on. But he's a very interesting guy, and I really want to go back now and watch The Yards and see how he worked earlier with Mark Wahlberg and Joaquin Phoenix. So in terms of We Own the Night, I would say that it's broody, it's dark, it's thoughtful, it's interesting, it's quite visceral, it's unpredictable in its nature, and what they accomplish in the first hour would often be a whole film in other cases. I really like the strong cast, the music was brilliant. There isn't anything that I didn't like about this film, in fact, so I'm going to give it a solid 5 and say it's definitely worth your time. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. So, have you seen We Own the Night? Get in touch and let us know. You can contact us in all of the usual ways. We're on email, we're on Facebook, we're on Ko-fi if you want to support us there. We have new episodes coming out every week, so don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon with another review.